Hey, this is Kamal Vidal, and you're listening to the Devy Devotional.
Welcome in to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to all things Devy and C2C. Hosted by John Arrington and Aaron Wilcox. This dynamic duo brings you actionable strategies with player-driven analysis for your Devy and C2C leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive in, if I could get my cameras right, and let's dive into what we learned from the NFL draft. Welcome into the Devy Devotional. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox86 on Twitter. And tonight we're going to be talking about what we learned from the NFL draft. We're going to do a little rookie mock, a quick one. You know, we're not going to go too crazy with it. And then we're going to dive into the 2025 rookie class, get into that a little bit, talk about some of the players that we think are exciting, maybe some of the players that can sneak in, because right now there's not a lot of proven talent there. So there's a lot to talk about there, and I'm pretty excited about that. I've seen some people posting stuff about the 2025 class, and I can definitely say I don't agree with all of it. But before we start talking about what we learned from this NFL draft, I think there is a lot that we can take away and we can learn. First, obviously, I have to ask, how are you doing, Aaron?
Doing well. And yes, there's always a lot that we can learn, a lot that we can glean from the NFL draft, and hopefully, prevent us from making the same mistakes, and then maybe also giving us some insight in who to target in future years as well. But I mean, I guess getting into like thoughts on the NFL draft as a whole, I guess just to begin things, I mean, there's always going to be those reaches. We see it every year with these teams. And that's what our whole last podcast was about, or at least part of that podcast was just warning folks, like there's going to be players that get bumped up because they get draft capital, or maybe they get a great landing spot. And that's just part of the equation. It's not going to overshadow or be more important than their profile as a player. So there is certainly some of that. We saw that with a bunch of wide receivers, and we saw that with quarterbacks here in Michael Penix and Bo Nix going in the first. And I mean, I know Penix was blocked, but there's still folks out there that are really excited about him in the long term. And I don't really see it. I think he was he was maybe not the smartest pick at all for a team to take there. And then I don't even think he's going to end up playing meaningful snaps for them in the first 2 years. So that is such a wasted pick. But, Bo Nix, you see him going now in the late first in Superflex drafts. And it's kind of wild. I mean, I guess I get it to a degree because people are QB starved, but I mean, we talked about some of this stuff in the past. Don't maybe bump up those already borderline talents to that degree.
Yeah, that's why we talked. That's why we had that show the last show was because of stuff like that. Bo Nix is a backup level quarterback, for NFL purposes. He could put a couple good games together, at some point. He could not lose games for the team. He's not going to go out and elevate players. He's not going to go out and win games for the team. Like, that's not who Bo Nix is. And, I feel like people are trying to kind of, I don't know, just explain it away or whatever. And they're like, well, no. Sean Payton loves the low A dot, like slant throws and, this and that. And it's like, yeah, but that doesn't work in the NFL. It worked with Drew Brees because he was a Hall of Fame level quarterback, not just because, oh, he can throw it short. Like, any quarterback can throw it short. Like, if it's that simple, you're telling me that, like, Zach Wilson, that they also brought in, can't throw it 7 yards a play? That's not how the NFL works, or else it would be really easy. And we'd have 150 quarterbacks that we were trying to figure out who's going to be the star this year, who's going to dink and dunk the best. But it's just not how the NFL works.
Right. You have to be able to complete intermediate deep passes, throw with anticipation, have great touch, but then also great power at other times. I mean, there's just so much from a cerebral standpoint too that these quarterbacks have to have. And I mean, Nix, he's made some strides. I will give him some credit. I mean, I like him a lot more than like a Will Levis at this point in Dynasty, but it's not like I'm targeting Nix heavily or anything like that. So at the end of the day, yeah, that was kind of a interesting interesting landing spots and everything for Knicks in the draft, and I think that there were a lot of other interesting landing spots for a bunch of wide receivers. We saw, I mean, I guess I could list off some of these guys, but there were plenty of wide receivers who maybe we didn't expect or didn't anticipate maybe such a large rise for all of them. But I mean, there were good landing spots for Lad McConkey, AD Mitchell. Well, maybe not a good landing spot for AD Mitchell, but he went day 2. Ricky Pearsall, great landing spot very early. Jalen Polk. Xavier Legette. I mean, he got first round draft capital. Keon Coleman, beginning in the second, and to the Bills. Javon Baker in the 4th, even that's not too bad considering he's going to be with Drake May, and he might be one of the best wide receivers on that roster. Roman Wilson to the Steelers. In theory, they're so they're so solid at drafting wide receivers historically, and Luke McCaffrey going day 2 as well to the Commanders. There's some interesting guys from that group, but I would say that I don't know how many of those guys I'm getting overly excited for. There's things to like, and it just happens every year. Some of these wide receivers get bumped up, and it was a solid class overall.
Yeah, but it goes back to what we were talking about on the last pod. It's like there were question marks with all these guys: Ricky Pearsall, Lad McConkey, AD Mitchell, Keon Coleman. They all have question marks. So they all kind of landed in good spots or got the draft capital that we love. That doesn't explain away, or that doesn't take away those question marks that we had for those players. And so there's a long list of players that I'm willing to take in the second round or whatever, but I'm not pushing those players into the first round. Then we get like a Jonathan Brooks actually gets drafted earlier than we expected him to. I mean, not that much earlier. I think we expected him to go 56 overall to the Cowboys, and I believe he went 46th overall to the Panthers. And people are like, "Well, I'm out. He's on the Panthers." Like, wait, so he got better draft capital. The team's saying like they truly believe in this player, and obviously we know other teams were in on Brooks and so, and then, but people are like, oh, well, I'd rather have Lad McConkey or I'd rather have Bo Nix or whoever over the first running back in this draft class. I get that people don't love the draft class, but it don't take away from the best player in that class. And so, I mean, I have Brooks as I guess I won't spoil it yet because we're going to do a little draft, but I have Brooks very high, I will say. And in like the Panthers, wherever, it doesn't matter where he landed. Like he landed in a spot where he's going to be the workhorse back. I think that's pretty obvious, especially with the draft capital, with everything that was invested in him. But there's a couple other running backs, even beyond Brooks, that I'm like, man, I really love what could be their role, going forward. Maybe it's not day 1, but midway through the season, at the very least, at the end of the season, like going into the next year and things like that. Like I'm really excited about those players. And so I've been kind of preaching all off season, don't forget about the running backs. And now I'm saying, like, don't forget about the running backs when you're drafting. And it seems like people kind of are. Like a lot of times I see players like a Marshawn Lloyd slip, well into the 3rd round. And I'm just like, what are we doing here? Like, I get you. I'm not saying you have to fall in love with the player, but I don't understand him in the 3rd round at all.
Right. Or Trey Benson. I mean, going to Arizona, that is very attractive in an up and coming offense. And James Conner, I mean, I don't think he's. Is it true that he's never had a full season? Like he's never played all the games?
Yeah,
Like he's
he's
always
never
missed.
played.
Yeah, he's always missed games every year. Do you expect a guy who's going into his late 20s, who's that injury prone, to be A, workhorse, and B, perfectly healthy? Like I'm not going to project that at all, especially when there's a talented rookie coming in there. So maybe we shouldn't give away all the players we'll be targeting in this quick mock draft. But I do think it's important to talk about how things unfolded. And I totally agree. Going back to what you said too, is I listed off a bunch of wide receivers there, some interesting landing spots and draft capital associated with it. But I totally agree that we shouldn't be bumping them into the first. If we can trade back at all, we should be trying to do that, acquire maybe multiple seconds instead of just drafting, whoever the first guy is in that tier. That's again an important part of tier-based drafting is make a big tier of guys where you feel pretty similar about them and trade back or navigate the draft and gain some value in that process.
Matt Bruning wants the players right now. We appreciate you listening, buddy. But yeah, I just wanted to ask, is there anything we can take away from this NFL draft process that we can use for Devy purposes before we get into the rookie draft? I promise you, Matt, we will get into it. I promise you. But is there anything we can take away? Like you and I were not very high on Lad McConkey, throughout this entire process. Like all throughout the year, whatever. Obviously, he goes and crushes the combine. Runs a 4.39, and people just absolutely fall in love with them. But like the reasons why we weren't absolutely in love with them are pretty obvious. Like he's never been a full-time player. He's 100% slot player, even when he is on the field. He doesn't leave the slot. He can't beat press. There's reasons why we don't love this player. He has back issues. He has injury concerns. But now he's being pushed into the first round. He obviously got great draft capital. Is there something we can take away from that? Like, is there a way that we can we can find those players and say, like, maybe I don't love this guy, but I expect him to get better draft capital than even I would want him to get, or whatever. Like, is there anything that we can take away there, or is it just like, hey, some guys are just going to get better draft capital, and there's nothing we can do about it?
Yeah. As far as some takeaways, I'm going to go a slightly different direction with my answer here, and I think that every year there's going to be QB risers, or nearly every year. I guess that it's not the case 100% of the time, but JJ McCarthy and Jaden Daniels, nobody, or I shouldn't say nobody, because there are folks. I mean, we mentioned them, for example, especially JJ, on this podcast, but there's no doubt that they took a step forward this final year, and that really propelled them into the early first in the actual NFL draft, and now in rookie drafts. And every year there's going to be that. I mean, to a lesser extent, even Michael Penix and Bo Nix rose up. Now, this year's an outlier as far as the amount of first round NFL quarterbacks that went, but looking ahead in future years, I mean, there's going to be guys in this next class that most likely are going to rise up. Right now, they might not have that complete profile, that very well-rounded and safe one, but they have a whole nother year. And typically we see solid quarterbacks get better year after year after year. So we should expect those guys to make that next leap and potentially get into the early to mid first next year. So we'll talk about those guys here in a later little teaser for the second half of the podcast, I guess. But I guess that is one takeaway, that there are going to typically be QB risers. So when we look at the Devy landscape and we say it's kind of underwhelming, just understand that those guys are not finished products quite yet.
Yeah, if a Bo Nix and a Michael Penix Jr. can get drafted in the top 15 of the NFL draft, then there's quite a few players that I would assume going into next year that we could probably do the same thing with, or at the very least be a first round pick in the NFL draft. And even though it's not a great quarterback class, but we do have to start figuring out, like, who are those players. Obviously, I'm going to say Jackson Dart. Like that's one of the players that I'm the biggest proponent for. But obviously that we can get into all that once we get into that preview there. I just was wondering if there was any way to really pick up on those kind of players like Lad McConkey, even like an AD Mitchell, like somebody like that. Like throughout the process, it's like, well, he's never led his team in market share, receiving yardage, like anything, maybe touchdowns, but touchdowns I don't really count. Like that's not really something I look at because they can be fluky. That's how you end up with your Terrace Marshall Juniors and all that. So I don't really pay attention to that, but it's like, AD Mitchell never really truly stood out in any way, shape, or form, whether you're talking about the film, the metrics, or anything. How do we go, oh, the NFL is going to love that player? Now, I think we kind of got lucky in the fact that he kind of landed in a terrible landing spot. He's going to be basically the wide receiver 3 for a low volume passing offense, with a very inaccurate quarterback. So it's probably going to work out to where we can go, oh, look at that. We're so smart, like, whatever. But what if he was the one that went to Buffalo, instead of Keon Coleman? And now we're going, oh, AD Mitchell has Josh Allen throwing it to him. Like, that might be the perfect landing spot. Like, how do we, and I mean, obviously we have no control over who gets drafted where and like this and that. So how do we know, hey, like this guy's going to be rising up? I don't know if there is an answer. I'm just trying to figure out if there's anything we can actually take away to be able to look for that player in the future and say, okay, I don't actually believe this guy's good, but The NFL might.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think that like Keon Coleman, who had some early career flashes there at Michigan State, at times he was kind of a dominant force there. And then transferring over to Florida State, he kind of cooled off down the stretch. Obviously, this final year, but there were some signs that he could be a pretty exciting playmaker there, and didn't necessarily materialize to the highest end outcome, but at the same time, good enough flashes in college to give us some hope that he would get that draft capital. And now he has an amazing landing spot. And if he can just get deployed and developed in that right way, there's hope. But again, I'm not projecting him to be great by any means, but that could be one example of things that you start to pick up on that lead you to draft him in the middle to late rounds in a Devy draft, for example. But yeah, it's really hard to pick up like on a Roman Wilson or Javon Baker, even when it's like, UCF, it's not exactly like this big time powerhouse for putting out NFL caliber wide receivers. It's tough. That's for sure.
Yeah, and Baker didn't even really do much at the Senior Bowl. Like, there's really been nothing throughout this process. It's been like, oh my God, Javon Baker's like this badass. Now Beth likes him, and so like I have some Baker that I've drafted in rookie drafts and everything, and maybe we'll even draft him here tonight. I don't know. We'll see. But I just think that it like you said, it's just really tough, and the fact that he didn't stand out at the Senior Bowl, and he didn't do that when no one truly stood out. So it was one of those things where it seems like people that have gone to the Senior Bowl in the past have always said, "Oh, there's one player that always stands out," and some people have said Lad McConkey. I don't really think I think he stood out on one day. I don't think he stood out throughout the entire process. And then other people have said Ricky Pearsall, which may be true because he left after one day. So it was kind of difficult to say, like, maybe he was that good after that one day that you can say, hey, he didn't even have to do anything. But I don't think anyone truly stood out. There were some good catches, good, bad, catches, drops, whatever. But yeah, I don't know. And maybe there's not enough or something that we can take away from how these guys get pushed up and everything, but I guess it's just remembering that like people will rise throughout the process, and just keeping an eye out throughout the season, and that's basically all we can do.
Yeah, right. I mean, take your dart throws on guys in positions where they can be a lead receiver for an offense in college, and then you're going to start hitting on some of those guys for sure that might randomly kind of slide up in the draft and the pre-draft process. And then for running backs, I mean, I still think that you want guys who can be versatile and involved in the receiving game. You want guys who are kind of explosive. Absolutely. Whether it's efficiency or athletic testing or both, hopefully. Those were a couple of guys who were drafted pretty early this year in Marshawn Lloyd and Trey Benson. And obviously we didn't get to see Jonathan Brooks test, but we know that he is, pretty explosive out there as a player as well. So those are three examples of top backs in this class where it's like, yeah, I could have seen that one coming as far as guys with interesting aspects to their physical profiles, and then obviously some indicators production wise in past years that they could start to break out.
Yeah, and actually I was trying to remember. I had a player that I wanted to talk about, and then I completely lost my my train of thought. But I just remembered the reason why I played Kamani Vidal, the promo at the beginning of the pod again, is I wanted to remind people who the original podcast was that was in love with Kamani, because all of a sudden everyone seems to love Kamani. He's everyone's sleeper. He's going in the early third in a lot of drafts now, which is insane, because when I first started talking about Kamani, I had other Devy analysts that didn't even know who he was, and I was explaining who he was to other Devy analysts, and then I was saying I'm going to take him in all of my fifth rounds. I ended up with like 2 Kamani Vidals out of all the leagues that I'm in, because other people were taking him ahead of me. And I'm just like, I mean, A, some of them have access to my ranks and stuff like that. So of course they're using it against me. But B, it just got to the point where it's like, all right, well, how the hell does a player go from that much of a sleeper to I got to take him at 303, in this draft? Like it's been one of the wildest things that I've ever seen. And I'm not even saying that I can be mad about it, because I love the player, but I don't know if I love him that much. It's really tough. Like, at what point? It's almost kind of like Ricky Pearsall too. Like, very similar thing. I was always like, hey man, Pearsall's kind of on my radar. Like I would like to draft him late, and then he goes first over, in the first round to the 49ers, and people are like, well, got to take him at 204. And I was like, whoa, like 204, I was talking about like the third, fourth round, whatever, but now you're talking about 204. It's just like, yeah, I don't know what to do here.
That's fair, and that's always that downside when it's like you love this guy, right? You've been propping up Ricky Pearsall for all this time, and now we're jumping the shark a little bit in some places at least. So that's yeah, that'll happen sometimes.
Yeah, I did not expect it with Vidal at the very least. I really thought I was going to get him in the fifth rounds, and that is not happening. Like I said, I got sniped quite a bit. Our buddy Levi Valentine decided that was going to be his job, was to take Vidal earlier than I was willing to in every single draft that we're in together, which is quite a few. But speaking of drafts, why don't we go ahead and dive into this one? We're not going to do anything too crazy. We've already talked about these players. We've given you guys analysis. We've done rookie mocks and all that kind of stuff. But I think it is important to at least run through it quickly and just, show where we would draft these players. I can probably promise you that this is not going to be consensus. This is not going to be where they would go in your draft. And we're not saying you have to take these players in these spots. However, I am saying, like, the way at least I'm going to attack it is this is where I would draft these players, like in a perfect world, or if we were just drafting off of based on my rankings, this is where I would be drafting these players. Now, obviously I know you can trade back, you can do whatever. It's not always a perfect world like that. And honestly, that's why I love it, because there's certain players like a Marshawn Lloyd that I might take in the second round, or I would take in the second round, but I've actually been able to get in the third in some of my drafts because other people are willing to let him slip. And so I love that kind of stuff. But in this exercise, we're basically just going to be running through where we would draft them or who we would take, in what spot, like that kind of thing. So I'll go ahead and let Aaron start us off here at the 101. I know we've both kind of been back and forth throughout this whole process, and things have changed throughout the process. So like, I don't mind minds being changed or anything like that. If they have, I know that I changed my mind throughout the process, and closer to the past like month or so on who my 101 is. So now I'm curious if you've done the same or if you are sticking to your guns.
Yeah, I'm at 101. I'm going to take Caleb Williams in this mock, going to the Bears, and I think that's just an excellent. As far as like weapons for him, it's much different than when Justin Fields was there. I think they're doing a better job of building up that offense. So Caleb Williams 101, though I considered another player here, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's where it's been tough. I always wanted the safety of Marvin Harrison Jr. because I think that he is a more I don't want to say like I don't want to say he has more upside, but I want to say that he has more of a floor, like a safer floor, like that kind of thing. But with what they've put around Caleb Williams is almost special. Like, it's not something you see every year or anything like that. In fact, I would say you almost see the opposite. Normally, you see the Bryce Young where, we're throwing to a 42-year-old wide receiver and and then a bunch of riffraffs and Jonathan Mingo and whoever else, like that kind of. That's what you normally get. Not we're throwing to DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Roma Dunze as your third. Like that's just special. They're adding to the offensive line, doing all that. So I have also done the same thing. Moved Caleb Williams to my 101 where he was not originally, but I'm not mad about getting Marvin Harrison Jr. at 102. I love that. I've always said that there was a tier of 5. But once we got landing spots, I really have made it a tier of 2. I believe you have Caleb Williams, and then you have Marvin Harrison Jr. going to the landing spot with Kyler. Yeah, obviously the clear one, the clear wide receiver one on the team. Like you don't have to worry about that. I love Kyler's ability, to get him the ball at all areas of the field. So I just think that it's like they can be special together, and I love taking them here at 102.
Very nice. At 103, I'm going to take Drake May, quarterback, going to the New England Patriots. Though I considered other options here, I really do like Drake May. I mean, both have really liked him throughout the process, and I know you didn't have him far behind Caleb Williams during that process. So I think that's um, at least in my opinion, I think it's a fair spot for May here. You don't even necessarily always need to draft him at 103. He'll sometimes go later, but I do in a super flex format just want to go a little bit more with that potential stud quarterback option because he offers both a really nice passing ceiling and also a rushing floor. Like we don't talk about that enough, but Drake May certainly a mobile guy and not a zero by any means in the rushing department.
Yeah, I mean, he honestly ran more than Caleb Williams did throughout college, and yet it seems like when we're talking about May, it's just like, oh, well, what's he going to do in the pocket and this and that? And it's like, well, he can do all that stuff out of the pocket too. I mean, like obviously, this is not going to be consensus because most people are not taking Drake May at 103. I love it. I love the conviction though, because I still believe in him as a talent. I do believe while New England is not the greatest landing spot as far as like aesthetics or whatever, they did some things to, help the situation, get things better. It is a new regime. So I believe in the talent. I believe in the player. I love the conviction there. I'm actually struggling with this one because I thought you were going to make it kind of easy for me. And now I'm really torn. I'm going to go ahead and lean towards the quarterback here because we're in super flex, but like I really am torn with another player there that you probably can figure out pretty easily. But I'm going to go ahead and take Jaden Daniels here at the 104. I just think that we saw in this past college season the upside of Jaden Daniels, what it can be. And for fantasy football purposes, it was game breaking. It was league winning. I had him in a couple leagues and it was literally league winning, so like that's one of the great things about being in C2C leagues and things like that is you already have that experience. Like I don't have to guess what Jaden Daniels can be for fantasy purposes. I know what he can be and it can be amazing. I do think that there's more question marks than people want to give him, credit for. Like he's not a perfect prospect by any means. As much as I love Jaden Daniels, and I've been one of the biggest Daniels backers throughout this whole process. The past couple of years, I was one of the few people that believed in him. I remember when Mike Valerie, our good friend Mike Valerie, said that I didn't have any quarterbacks in our C2C league when I had Jaden Daniels and JJ McCarthy, and I was like, I don't know, but. So yeah, I'll take Daniels here. I think I've already talked about the upside is just unbelievable. The rushing ability, we do have to worry a little bit about, is he going to stay healthy? Is he going to be able to do the things that he did in college and get away with it in the NFL? I will say he's a tough SOB, so like I'll give him credit for that. I don't know if it's going to work in the NFL or not. Being able to take some of the hits that he took in college, but I'll just say like, hey, he gets up every time.
Yeah, no, I think you make really good points there. With Daniels, I think the concerns that you threw out there would be the same for me, and same with the upside. But at 105 here, I'm going to take Malik Neighbors, wide receiver, going to the Giants out of LSU. Guy is just a stud, and thinking about this pre-draft process, even post-draft process, folks are still saying like, oh, he's probably in that same tier as Marvin Harrison Jr., but you're getting him for cheaper in your draft. So got to feel good with Malik Neighbors there, who he's just going to be force-fed targets. I mean, he should be the number one right away for the Giants, and I understand that he's not with like some sort of elite passing quarterback. It's not the best situation ever, but at the same time, you can't argue with a guy being a target hog right away, and with the talent that Malik Neighbors has.
My mouse wasn't working. Yeah, I love the pick. Like I said, I was torn just because I really have Neighbors as like almost almost exactly the same grade as Marvin Harrison Jr. Obviously, a much worse landing spot, and so I really try not to like differentiate too much between that with guys at that level. Like I don't truly care that Daniel Jones is throwing him the ball or Drew Lock or whoever the hell. I don't care. Like Malik Neighbors is that damn good, and he's going to get his. And so That's why I'm like, I honestly considered him over Jaden Daniels, just because I do believe that Malik Neighbors can be that game changing. And once again, it's kind of going back to the safety thing. Like Jaden Daniels' upside is up here. It's unbelievable, but the floor is definitely like questionable. Like what could be, he could be out of the league. He could be just not what we expected him to be, or what he could revert back to what he was, a couple of years ago or whatever. Like there's question marks. Malik Neighbors is going to be a great wide receiver in the NFL for years to come. I truly believe that. So there is a safety with Neighbors, but there's a little more upside with Daniels, which is why I went that route. But you made the right call there. I'm going to go ahead and take probably the easiest pick so far without any kind of questions, at least in my mind. And that's my boy, JJ McCarthy. I've been all over him for at least a year and a half now. And I've gotten a lot of flack from people about loving JJ McCarthy. And I feel a little vindicated with the landing spot, with the draft capital, with everything. People talking about he was their QB2 on their board and this and that, whether it's true or not. I do feel a little vindicated with all of that. And we cannot say that I think we have to say, like, he has the best landing spot in all of football. Like I was saying, how Caleb Williams got like one of the best landing spots that you can possibly get. I don't think that JJ McCarthy is that far behind. And there's even arguments where you could say he has a better landing spot than even Caleb Williams. And so it's kind of perfect for a player that, is a little more raw. Well, what better way to like grow and become a better player than by throwing to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison? Like, it's just like the rich get richer kind of deal.
I love it. Going to my Minnesota Vikings. Great weapons for sure at his disposal. So I like it. And you should get some opportunities there year one. So very nice. At 107 here, I am a little bit torn on this, not going to lie, but I'm going to go with Rome Odunze. We talked a little bit about the situation there in Chicago and realizing that Keenan Allen's age and then also his contract will most likely not allow him to be a thorn in Odunze's side for too many years. I think year one, yes, there will be some barrier, but I could definitely see Odunze still getting involved. And we're talking about long term. Like this is not redraft mock necessarily. This is more of a dynasty oriented one. So certainly Odunze is set up in a nice place long term. Heck, I don't even know how long DJ Moore will be there. Hopefully, if they're smart, they'll keep him around because DJ Moore is very good as well. But Odunze is going to be a very nice asset there. So we'll see what the ultimate ceiling is. Maybe not as safe as Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison Jr. Pick wise, but I still like Odunze.
Yeah, that one's tough for me because obviously he got the great draft capital, and but the landing spot is not the greatest. But like you said, it could be very cleared out within a year. And we want to have a long-term lens on this. We don't want to just look at 2024 and say, what's going to happen. We have to look at all of it. And I think he will be connected with Caleb Williams for a long time, and that's great. I just don't have Odunze as in the same tier as Neighbors and MHJ. Like a lot of people were trying to push him up, throughout the whole process. And so at that point, I kind of just want to be out, and not out because like obviously I would take the player, but not here. There's a couple other players that I'd rather take, and it kind of puts them all into like one tier. And then now I'm looking at landing spots. Once we're in the same tier, I'm looking at landing spots. I'm looking at like the ability to lead their team in year one, things like that. And Odunze cannot do that, at least in my opinion. So I don't hate the pick. I don't love the pick either. And I will take who I think should have gone there in Xavier Worthy. And I absolutely love the player. Loved him this entire time. Obviously breaks the combine record. But he's so much more than just speed. I mean, he's an actual route runner. He's dealt with some pretty crappy quarterback play, especially when we're talking about like the deep ball and things like that with Quinn Ewers. But man, he was special, especially in that first year, his freshman season. He was special then, and then he has basically been like good, since then, but it didn't really get back to that first year, and so people kind of like have fallen out of love with him because of that. But I don't think there's any reason to fall out of love, especially when you consider the landing spot with Patrick Mahomes. Like I said, he's not just this MVS kind of guy that can only run fast or only run fast, only run straight, do all that. He's such a different player. He can play inside, he can play outside, he can, and that Andy Reid's going to utilize that and actually use him as an actual weapon. And so that's why I'm willing to take, because I think when it's all said and done, even if you want to say that Odunze is a better wide receiver, which I'm not going to truly argue with you on that one, but even if you want to say that, I think that when it's all said and done, Xavier Worthy will be worth more than Odunze by the end of the year. And that's why I'm saying I think that he should have been the pick at 107, but we're kind of just splitting hairs at this point.
Exactly. And for whatever reason, the dynasty community is just a little bit slow to come around on Worthy, or they're kind of hesitant. And I think they'll learn that he's a very good player and a very good spot. So I respect the Worthy pick there. Let's go with the next guy at 109 here. I will say that I'm slightly torn, but I'm not going to waver. I'm going to pick Brock Bowers here. Do I feel great about it? No, I didn't feel great about Roma Dunze. I wouldn't have necessarily, I would have been open to trading back. And same thing here, potentially, but at the same time, after pick 11 or so in the Superflex rookie drafts, I mean, there's a huge tier of guys, at least for me. And so I want to be within these first 10, 11 picks in the draft. And the guy that I just happened to go with on this occasion, Brock Bowers, tight end who went to Las Vegas. I understand that that's not the most sexy landing spot because A, he doesn't get the best quarterback, and B, he is not going to be the number one target there as a rookie. So I think that those are two tough things for him. But in the long term, I mean, the guy is just super explosive, super talented, probably the best tight end prospect that we've seen in so many years. I mean, you can make an argument for Kyle Pitts, but absolutely a stud playmaker there. I think he should be involved early. Michael Mayer, he's absolutely a fine tight end, but he's not on Brock Bowers' level. Brock Bowers is just such a good receiving weapon. So at this point in the draft, I think you take him, or at least consider taking him here.
Yeah, he's been kind of my 108, 109 throughout the whole process. And that's the thing. Like, I actually love taking him here at 109, but especially like a month ago, everyone's like, "Oh, he's my 105." Like you got to take him at 105. That's where he is. And then he goes to a bad landing spot, and everyone's like, "Well, all right, you can have him at 109." And actually had this happen in an actual draft that we did in Harry Potter, which you're not in, but it's a fun league. But yeah, I actually traded up. I had the I had the 105. I took Drake May, and then at 109, Bowers was still sitting there, and I was like, man, I can't let this happen. Like, I'm not the biggest Bowers fan, but like I still do believe he's a very talented tight end / wide receiver, whatever you want to call him. And so I traded my future my 25 first and 25 second to get up to 109, and I took Bowers there, and I was just like, I can't let this happen. So I love the pick there. I feel like that is who needs to go at that spot. Like I feel like that was another easy one for sure. I was actually very interested to see if you were going to take him or if you were going to let him slide because of the landing spot. So I'm glad you made the right call there. I'm going to take probably the consensus pick here, and it's Jonathan Brooks. I think that's become the consensus 110, but there's obviously people that will argue that there's a player or two that should go there instead of Brooks. But like I was talking about earlier in the pod, man, like he's been my RB1 in the process the entire time. Nothing has changed. He got great draft capital. He's going to be the workhorse back. All things are coming up great for his recovery. They're saying he's going to be ready for training camp, even if it's a slow burn like they did with Breece Hall this past year. I don't truly care, like weeks 1 through 4, whatever, if he only touches the ball 8 times a game, I don't care, because it's the rest of the season when he's winning you championships. That's when I'm going to care about Jonathan Brooks, and that's where I'm going to be excited that I took him here at 110.
Yep, no qualms with that selection there. But to be honest, I don't think that is. I mean, maybe it's becoming more and more consensus or more popular. But I was able to get Jonathan Brooks at 111. A guy went who has not been selected yet ahead of him in a draft that we're in. So very excited to get Jonathan Brooks, whether he's at 10 or 11 or so. Absolutely respectable pick there, just because at this spot, I mean, there's a little bit of risk here if you go with this next guy. I'll take him here. This is where you'll oftentimes see him in drafts and kind of the end of a tier for some. And that's going to be Brian Thomas Jr., another wide receiver from LSU who ended up going in the first there to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think that Jacksonville was a fine landing spot. Not bad. Definitely not worst case scenario by any means. And he could certainly step up there, but I acknowledge the risk with him. And that's why I actually prefer going Brooks over him, is just because that Brian Thomas Jr., I mean, there's a lot of aspects to his profile where it's like, one hit wonder. Was he fed off of Jaden Daniels' career year, and because Odunze was not Odunze, Malik Neighbors was taking all the targets, or sorry, taking all the opposing coverages, and they were focusing on trying to cover him. Then we saw Brian Thomas Jr. break open for all these plays. He does not have the most diverse route tree. Reception perception, showed that he's fine at the routes he does run. But at the same time, there are just aspects to his career profile. When you zoom out from just that last year where he really broke out, where there's concerns. So I think, fine pick here at 11. I don't know that I would take him any earlier than this, though. But Brian Thomas Jr. is the selection here.
Yeah, I think there's a very clear-cut tier break after Jonathan Brooks. And then that's when you kind of want to be trading out. The problem is I've found, at least in my drafts, that no one really wants to trade up in this spot. I had quite a few 110, 111, 112, humble brag, whatever. But I just found that, like, once Brooks went, people were like, yeah, I'm out. Like, I don't want to trade up anymore. And there's like, make your pick. Because I tried to trade back, and it's like, unless you're just willing to take a third or a fourth or whatever to differentiate between a couple picks, then it's like, just go ahead and take your guy. And I do have Brian Thomas Jr. as the next guy, but I'll tell you what, like, I don't have like high hopes for year one at the very least. Like, I'm not saying he can't develop into a good player, or at least flash to, keep up his value and stuff like that. Like, I'm not hating on the player at all. Like you said, he has work to do. He needs to work learn as a route runner. He's definitely not going to be the wide receiver one on his team in year one. He could possibly get to that eventually, but yeah, he is my next player. So, like, I'm not hating on the pick at all. I just I think that, like I said, there's a clear tier break here, and so I'm going to go ahead and take my RB2, but once again, a tier break from the RB1. So even though I'm taking him 2 picks after, I think that I just want to be very clear that, like, I don't. Even though I like both players, like, I feel so much better about Jonathan Brooks. But we talked earlier about Trey Benson going to the Cardinals. It's kind of like the perfect, like, landing spot. Like, yes, he's going to have competition in year one. I don't think James Conner's just going away because they drafted Trey Benson. And so I do really think it's going to be a 50-50, 60-40 kind of split. But I think that Benson definitely is going to get that role in year two. And I think that he can be enough to at least be a flex player for you or whatever in year one. Like, not to the same level, but kind of what Jahmyr Gibbs was doing earlier in the season last year. Not necessarily later in the season when he was kind of like winning you leagues and all that kind of stuff, but, enough to get you 10, 12 points, whatever. Sometimes that's good enough, especially with injuries and whatnot. And then, like you said, James Conner is not the healthiest person in the world. So, like, if he goes out, then all of a sudden Benson could be a league winner and definitely could do that. So I like the talent. I like the opportunity. And so, yeah, give me Trey Benson here at 112.
Yeah, I like it a lot. That was the guy I would have selected next if he had fallen to the second round. You will see him fall in quite a few drafts. You might see a different guy there at the 112 in your draft. So certainly keep an eye out for that, because I actually like Trey Benson's landing spot long term, probably more than Jonathan Brooks. And I don't think that the second versus third round draft capital is something I'm too worried about as far as, still good investment on a guy in Trey Benson. So for our first round here, I'll just kind of speed through it. I started off with Caleb Williams, then John went Marvin Harrison Jr., then I went Drake May, then Jaden Daniels, then Malik Neighbors, then JJ McCarthy, followed by Rome Odunze and Xavier Worthy, Brock Bowers, then Jonathan Brooks, Brian Thomas, and then capped off at the 112 with Trey Benson.
But Aaron, there was two other quarterbacks that were drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. Why were they not drafted here in the first round of our draft?
And you'll also notice there are a couple of first round or very early second round NFL draft picks in prominent positions going to pretty good teams that we did not select either in the first round. So we shall see if they actually get selected in the second here or not. Do you want to lead this off since I led off the first round, or do you care?
Yeah, sure. I'll lead it off because, or no, actually, no, I'm gonna let you lead it off because I know my player is not somebody that's being drafted this early, and so like I have conviction. I love the player. I have taken him here around this range, but I know that you don't have to, and so I don't want to confuse people or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I'm going to go with a guy who you don't have to draft here either. But like we said earlier, like don't take these picks as gospel. Like you have to draft him at 201. Like you can trade back and get this guy, but that is Ricky Pearsall going to the 49ers. And the reason that I am so much more excited about this compared to maybe I was even about Ricky Pearsall, weeks and weeks ago, was just the fact that he went to the 49ers, who 49ers are just very, very good at getting their featured by receivers touches, efficient offense, and long-term, we know that Debo and Ayuk, one of them is likely gone. I mean, we don't know exactly when that's going to be. Could be this off season. Chances are it's probably after this season, but there's still some opportunity for Ricky Pearsall to get on the field, some decent touches there as early as year one. We know that they invested a first round draft pick in him. So despite him being a little bit older at the position, it's not really that big of a factor if you're going to get, multiple good years out of a guy like that. I'm not too worried. It's worked out pretty well for Devonta Smith, and you go down the line. When solid players, even if they come into the league and they're like 23 or so, that doesn't automatically write them off. It should be a cautionary tale. That's why he's not a first round rookie draft pick by any means. That would be overreacting to the max, but he was a guy that I went with here, but know that I have a long list of players. So Ricky Pearsall by no means was an easy selection at this slot.
Yeah, I obviously, like I said, I like Pearsall, and I can't say I love the landing spot, but it could clear out very quickly, and then all of a sudden, I mean, it could even clear out in a month or so. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen at this point. I really feel like they're going to play out the season, and they're really just kind of backloading. Like they're saying, like, hey, we have a good team. Like, let's just keep it good, and so we don't have to worry about re-signing or forcing a Debo, or a contract or whatever. We can say, hey, we have Pearsall, obviously a different player, but a quality player. And same thing that Pearsall has question marks. Like he's not a perfect prospect by any means or anything. So but that's why we're taking him here in the second. And I do agree. I mean, there's a very large tier of players here, and so we're going to take them in different orders here than what a lot of your drafts are going to go. But it's just where I would. Once again, in a perfect world, where I would take them. And so I'm going to go ahead and take Marshawn Lloyd. I have gotten him in at 303. I've gotten him late. I've gotten him at the end of the second, early third, but I'm willing to take him here. I don't think that Trey Benson and Marshawn Lloyd's scenarios or situations are all that different. And yet, he's going almost around, sometimes even a little bit like a round and a half later than Benson. And I don't really get it. They have similar athleticism. Marshawn Lloyd actually has better size, a higher BMI, can be more of that workhorse back, even though he didn't necessarily do that in college. He showed off his receiving ability at the Senior Bowl. He obviously showed his athleticism and everything at the Combine. And I mean, honestly, the more I think about it, and it's kind of helmet scouting at this point, but the more I think about it, he really reminds me of Aaron Jones. And he goes to the Packers, and guess what? They need an Aaron Jones. And I mean, you're going to say, oh, but Josh Jacobs. Like, Josh Jacobs is basically on a 1-year contract, and he was one of the least efficient players or running backs last year. Now, he was good the year prior, so I'm not trying to act like he couldn't possibly be good or anything like that. But there's a lot of important metrics that are saying like Josh Jacobs is probably past his prime, even though he's not age-wise. Maybe it's the amount of touches that, the amount of work that he's been put through over the past 4 or 5 years in the NFL, whatever it might be. Maybe he's been dealing with injuries that we don't truly know about. I don't know, but he just was not the same player last year. And so I'm not overly scared about Josh Jacobs, but even if he is, like, let's say he's back and he's fine, whatever. The coaches have come out and said, like, he's going to be our change of pace. Like, he's going to be that lightning at the very least to a Josh Jacobs thunder. He's going to probably be more of the receiving back than Jacobs. He's going to be that third down back, the electric, like I said, change of pace, all that kind of good stuff. So I don't really feel like it's that different of a situation than Trey Benson. And it's another exciting offense. Like, everyone loves all the pieces of Green Bay's offense right now. So, like, why wouldn't you love the exciting, bursty, electric running back as well? So I'm willing to take him here. Once again, you don't have to, but I love getting Marshawn Lloyd, and he's probably my most rostered player at this point throughout all of my rookie drafts, because I just kept taking him every single time. It was like in the second round, I'm looking, I'm like, well, I'm taking Lloyd again.
Yeah. And I like that you can get him at a discount, like you said. So he's definitely going a lot cheaper than Trey Benson, and at that price, I'm jumping at it. I do tend to disagree just in that I mean, how old and injury prone James Conner is, I think that's an easier hurdle by far than Josh Jacobs. Say what you want about some of the efficiency. A lot of great backs would be inefficient on that bad of a Las Vegas team last year. So Josh Jacobs, I mean, and he has played banged up in the past, so it wouldn't surprise me that was partially the case too last year. But at the end of the day, there's room for another guy there. So I'm not arguing that Lloyd is a bad pick by any means, just a little bit more of an obstacle in comparison. At least I feel that way. But at the same time, I like the talent. So I'm not going to disparage that, especially since I was considering him here too. So how would I go with another running back? And I know this might be a shock to some folks. I don't have to take him this early, but I'm just going to go with a guy here in Jalen Wright going to Miami. And I know this is earlier than some would take him, but you just think about that running back situation there in Miami, and it's just so tantalizing. And you want to talk about another running back who is just on his way out, and that's Raheem Mostert. And who was the RB5-ish in fantasy last year? Oh yeah, Raheem Mostert at like 32 years old. Jalen Wright is I'm not going to say he's a clone, but I think he's a slightly bigger and better version at this point in their careers. Maybe Raheem Mostert was more effective at some point in his prime, but yeah, definitely I'm a big fan here, and we've been talking about him for a long time. I mean, heck, I've been talking about Jalen Wright for like 3 years. When he initially was coming out, I liked his speed coming out of high school, and he's been able to translate that to good efficiency in the SEC, and he lands in kind of that perfect spot, just like Achane did as well. And we know that Achane's not a workhorse guy. Like, he's going to get his touches. Absolutely. He's going to be efficient. He's going to be a fun fantasy guy. But I am curious to see, maybe we even see Wright outpace him this season. So I think that in Miami, very, very much intrigued by Jalen Wright and that opportunity.
Yeah, and I've always been the biggest Dylan Sampson fan. So, like, I've kind of, not to say that I've dismissed Jalen Wright, but I've always been more focused on Sampson. And then, but throughout the draft process, I've been like, all right, well, yeah, I still like Wright. It's just that I kind of like, or I don't know, maybe I just love the fact that no one seems to be on Dylan Sampson, or at least in the past, more people seem to be jumping on board now. And so I loved like going after that player. But yeah, I have him here in this tier, and it's a very large tier. I'm really not going to argue with any pick as long as it's in this tier of players and we're not jumping ahead to other tiers. Then I'm fine with it. So yeah, I mean, like you said, it's going to be Wright's going to be probably a 50% player or something eventually. Maybe not like day one or anything like that. but it could really be like a really nice mix of Jalen Wright and Devin Achane or Achane, I mean, and I think that like it'll be good for both of them because neither one of them are truly meant for like workhorse level touches or anything like that. So like I said, there's a very big tier here. I'm struggling with which one to go, but I'm just going to go ahead and take more of like the chalky pick that probably would have been gone in every other draft that we would go. And I'm going to go ahead and take Lad McConkey here. I mean, he has the speed, the combine, the obviously the draft capital and the landing spot. I don't necessarily believe in the player. Like I think that I honestly think that people are going to be disappointed, when it's all said and done. But he does have that great opportunity on a pretty wide open, ambiguous wide receiver core. I think he is a 100% slot player, and people, Keenan Allen. Well, Keenan Allen is not a 100% slot player. He's like a 60-40 player, and and he's also he's just a better player. He's a much better player. Always has been. So like, let's not comp this guy that is injury prone and like played 50% of college snaps to Keenan Allen, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Let's just not do that. Okay. So I will take him here at what, the 204. I don't love it, but I'm willing to take him here in this range. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, it's not the end of the world. But I think that there's not as much upside to this player as people are trying to act like there is.
Yeah, I agree with the limited upside because I think that he can be a starter year one, and that doesn't mean that he's ever going to be confidently in your starting lineup. You can be a starter in the NFL. You can be like, Demario Douglas for the Patriots last year. You can be Jacoby Myers for what he did in the past in the Patriots, but then now for Las Vegas, and I guess serviceable if you want to fit him into a flex. But is he going to be a difference making type of asset for your dynasty team? I'm not sure. And I know those comps that I just used are primarily slot guys, and that kind of I guess corresponds to what you're saying, is that he should probably be a slot guy. I understand that he played outside in college, so there will be folks out there saying, well, he's not just this little slot guy, he's not just this little white Julian Edelman type of guy, and we're not saying that he is. He can be deployed in some different ways downfield, but at the end of the day, his frame, his injury history, those types of things, physicality, I don't really see him as this like alpha outside guy at all. Or as far as this like super versatile play 100% of the snaps guy, because he wasn't that in college. He was never that. I mean, he was efficient, yes, but he was never this type of guy who was dominating his team's receptions, targets, etc. So I just think that he's a little bit more of a role player. Can't knock you for taking him here. You could probably sell him for more than this, and I would maybe explore that, especially if somebody's excited to take him because he's probably going in the late first. But enough time spent on your pick there. With my pick here, I am kind of torn, but at this point in the draft, I am going to have to go with the quarterback here, who is going to be a starter, presumably day one. Bo Nix in Denver. He has. There's some things going for him target wise, coaching staff wise. I mean, I'm not like over the moon about it, but I can understand why somebody might still believe in Sean Payton being able to develop this type of quarterback. Bo Nix, like I said before, I mean, I think he's better than a guy like Will Levis, who's just insanely, just not accurate and just all over the place. Like Nix has good mobility. He has good enough arm strength when he chooses to throw it down the field. He is very accurate underneath. It's just, we already highlighted all the weaknesses earlier. We don't have to rehash that at this point in the mid-second at 105. I am comfortable taking him. I don't think you'll get him here in a lot of drafts, but that's kind of where we're at with this tier.
205, just to be clear, not 105.
Sorry, I don't know. 205 is definitely.
Please do not take Bo Nix at 105, please. Yeah, I mean, I can't hate on it. He's obviously going earlier than this in a lot of drafts, or most drafts even. I'm still not willing to take him here. So, but I can't hate on it either. I get the arguments, and at least here, there's actually the ability for him to gain value. I don't think it's going to happen, but he has that ability when you're taking him at 205. He does not have the ability to gain value when you're taking him at 109 or 110 or something like that. Like that is his ceiling. Like he's never going to be worth more than 109 or 110. It's just not going to happen. I'm sorry, guys. The guy with the career 6.7 A dot is not going to all of a sudden be the next Peyton Manning. It's just not happening. Once again, large tier here. You already took a couple of my guys. So I'm going to go with, I'm just going to go, I'm going to stick to my ranks here. I know that people have fallen out of love with Troy Franklin throughout the entire process, but like I still believe he is a talented player. I honestly don't believe that him and Roma Dunze are that different, and yet you're looking at like almost a full round of difference here in this draft, and obviously in most drafts. Franklin might even go later than this. So I mean, sometimes you might even be talking about a round and a half or even 2 rounds of difference in the players, but I mean, they played very similar schedules, in the Pac-12. And if you look at their per game numbers and things like that, like they had a lot of similarities, yards per reception and yards per game and this and that. So it's kind of interesting, that like we can at least we can look at the Pac-12 and like say, hey, like they're not the greatest defenses, but we can compare 2 players that were playing, similar defenses, similar teams, and say, like, look what they were doing, and they were doing things very similarly. Yes, I understand he ran like zigzag routes at the combine, and maybe wasn't, as weigh in as much as people want, but I don't care about weight anymore. Like I think the NFL has shown us that we don't need to care about a player's weight anymore. I do believe he's a better route runner than people want to give him credit for, because people are trying to act like he is just going to be like the 9 route kind of guy, and like that's it. But I think he has more to his game than that. And so I'm willing to take him here. He obviously has the opportunity to be the wide receiver 1 on his own team, his NFL team. He just so happens to be locked up with his college quarterback. Even if I don't believe he's great, at least they have that consistency there, and already have that rapport and everything. So I will take Troy Franklin here. I know there's some other wide receivers that we could probably go with that got better draft capital and this and that, but I truly believe that Troy Franklin is a better player.
Yeah, no, I don't mind that pick at all. Troy Franklin, he was definitely in the list of guys that I was considering there. Still a good landing spot despite the fall. I mean, we've seen some 4th round wide receivers pan out in recent years. And if a guy on day 3 is actually going to pop, it's a guy with the profile like Troy Franklin. So that's basically the recipe for success if you're taking a day 3 wide receiver, is having a guy with that strong of production and athleticism, etc. So very nice there. Now, as far as my selection here, I'm between a couple of players, but I'll go with Blake Corum, selected to the Los Angeles Rams. I just think that Blake Corum, at the end of the day, complements and kind of replicates, honestly, what Kyron Williams has talent-wise. And we know that the Rams, they're able to cycle through these backs, whether it's due to, once they get injured, they like the next guy to step up into a workhorse role. We understand that offense for the foreseeable future is still going to be pretty effective for running back play with Sean McVay. And at the end of the day, Corum is a good back. Like, is he, the most insane athlete out there? No, but I mean, he's just very, very solid. He can even get some goal line work there, maybe better served for that role than Kyron Williams. We know that Corum he scored a ton of touchdowns at Michigan, and I know he was highly trusted by Harbaugh, but at the end of the day, I think Corum can translate some of that to the NFL, and he gives you a very high-end handcuff, if nothing else. So at this point in the second, get a guy who's a clear number 2 in an offense, who could potentially put up some huge numbers. We saw what Kyron Williams did last year, and we have to very much value that Blake Corum could be putting up some huge numbers if he gets that opportunity.
It's kind of crazy when you think about it that the 5'7" guy might be the goal line back, but that's the world that we live in. I mean, he has a great BMI and everything. Like, he is a stout 5'7" player, and I think he's actually really close to being 5'8". So it's kind of jokingly calling him 5'7", just because our good friend Dirty Mike has always said, "Oh, he's 5'7". He's 5'7". It's like, well, he is, but he's almost 5'8". But yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy, but I honestly do believe that he will be the goal line back, unless somehow, some way, Zach Evans gets freed from whatever prison he's in. Which, like, I'll never understand the Zach Evans thing. Like, I don't think there. This wasn't like a film versus analytics, and this is a complete tangent, but whatever. That's what I do. This wasn't like a film versus analytics thing. Like, I'd say 99% of people said that Zach Evans was a quality player, and then he's just not. So it just doesn't make any sense. I do think there's like some off the field concerns, and maybe his head's not screwed on straight and stuff like that. So sometimes that just happens, and we have to say, hey, the talent was there, but the player is just not quite right in the head or whatever. And that, I think that it kind of lends to what's happening here. But yeah, I don't mind the pick there. This is right around where I have Corum. I've always been a big fan of him. I wish that he went to a better landing spot, of course, like where we could say he's wide open, like this and that, but I don't think it's a bad landing spot either. And then I have a couple wide receivers that I'm kind of flip-flopping between, and I don't know which one to take, but I'm going to go ahead and just take basically the wide receiver one in Buffalo with Keon Coleman. He obviously got the draft capital. I always liked Coleman coming from Michigan State, going to FSU, and it just didn't really seem to work out as well as I would have liked, but obviously there was concerns, or they lost their quarterback partway through the season, and I'm not even saying that Jordan Travis is like an amazing quarterback anyway. He's not bad. I don't hate him. But I don't know if Coleman can truly separate, or if he's just more of that like old school, contested catch kind of guy. But if you're going to be a contested catch kind of guy, where do I want you to go? Buffalo with Josh Allen. Like, I think that we can see, he obviously has the ability to score touchdowns, and he's good at that part of the game. So I don't know if I truly believe he is like this amazing wide receiver, but he did land in a great spot. He obviously got the draft capital. And I think that, the connection between him and Josh Allen can be really good. But more importantly, there's just no one else there. Like, I'm sorry, Khalil Shakir is not a thing, as much as people want him to be. And, I love Dalton Kincaid, but he's still tight end. And so I think that he can be the one, or at least as much of the one as he can be. But at 208, I'm willing to go ahead and take that shot and say, hey, what if it works out? What if it, like, what if he's George Pickens-esque, where like he can't separate for shit, but like he just makes those amazing catches and people fall in love with them, and then I can sell him for a first, like that kind of thing. And like I really feel like he can be that, and so I'm willing to go ahead and take him here.
Yeah, I'm kind of sad that you sniped me there, because Keon Coleman at this point in the draft, yeah, that was my next pick. I considered taking him in my last two selections, but figured he might fall. It was not the case here. So definitely like the combination of the landing spot, definitely more so, but the talent is not bad by any means. So I respect that. A guy. So I'm not gonna lie, I am torn here. I might be going against my rankings, but now I'm tilting. Okay.
Oh, he's tilting.
Yeah. Hate to see it, right? Yeah. Xavier Legette, first
Oh
round wide
no.
receiver for the Carolina Panthers. I don't know. I just am. It's so gross. He's not. I don't have him this high in my rankings, but I am just going to default to that and say, there are some interesting circumstances. I don't know if I'm fully buying them for reasons why he didn't produce earlier, but when he did get on the field, very explosive, very much. He's different than Jonathan Mingo, but at the same time, I mean, they're kind of like these guys where they don't deserve to go that early in the NFL draft. And I'm just glad that I'm not having to pay up in the early second or anything like that for Xavier Leggett. He's going here more in the late second, which is a price where I can start to, I can take that price. I'm not saying that I'm excited to draft him here, but I do believe that you drafted him in the late second as well in a recent rookie draft that we're in together. And maybe that was the one that you co-managed with Duchesne's, but that I think is, as early as I would take him, somewhere in the late seconds.
If I drafted Leggett on any team, I'm going to be very upset. I do not believe that I have drafted Leggett anywhere unless I just got blackout drunk or something. I don't know. I was just getting ready to say that, like, obviously I'll never write anyone completely off my board or anything like that. But, I do have a very refined process and I rank accordingly because of that. And so, and I understand that, like, I understand that I will never get him, and that's fine. That's kind of what I'm saying by doing this. But Xavier Leggett is my 401 in my ranks. Like that is where I'm willing to take Xavier Leggett. I am not willing to take him any higher. I get it. It's exciting, but this is what we talked about. And I'm not even saying that you're necessarily doing it at 209. This is what we talked about. Like, don't, just because the guy got first round draft capital doesn't mean he's good all of a sudden. Like, let's not push him ahead of players that we've already liked and stuff like that. And at 209, it's not necessarily egregious, but I'm still just not willing to do it. But I think you're thinking of someone else, because we did not take Xavier Leggett. I do not think, unless I completely missed that one.
So yeah, no, I thought I saw at least maybe Duchesne's do it, but maybe different draft, something like that.
Yeah, I was actually really happy with our draft, because we made some good picks there. So if we added Leggett, then I'm going to be very upset.
Yeah, I might be.
Yeah, let's see. So that leaves me here at 210, and I'm gonna stick to my guns here. I'm gonna go ahead and take a player that I've been higher on throughout this entire off season, and it seems like the NFL agreed with me, and that's Jalen Polk out of New England. He kind of got forgotten about throughout the entire process, because obviously you had the people that were absolutely in love with Roma Dunze, but then you had another group that really liked Jalen McMillan. And it just seems like Polk was kind of the forgotten man. And then all of a sudden he's drafted very early on, like extremely early, picked 37th overall, I believe 37 overall in the NFL draft, almost a first rounder. And yet people seem to just hate him because A, he's in New England, B, they didn't really like him or didn't love him or whatever throughout the process. And, C, they don't know what to think about Drake May, a rookie quarterback, all that kind of stuff. But the way I look at it is, he is the wide receiver one as of right now. Like, immediately, he's the wide receiver one for this team. Obviously, they drafted a couple other players. I'm not saying he doesn't have any competition or anything like that, but I do believe that he is the wide receiver one for that team. And I'm able to get him here at 209. And there's not too many guys that you can say. I mean, we just took Keon Coleman before that, and even Xavier Leggett, you can say they're a wide receiver one, but I don't truly believe in the talent there. Actually, I guess we would say that Deontay Johnson would probably be the wide receiver one there. But with Keon Coleman, Jalen Polk, like, I'm just saying, like, there's opportunity there. And even if you don't love the player, it's 210. It's not 110 or something like that. And I'm taking a shot on the guy that I do think has upside. And one of the things I love about Polk is it's not like he's a very efficient player. Like, he has the high yards per reception. He has the high PPR points per touch. So, like, if he does hit, I think it can be a big hit. It's not going to be that guy that's, he's getting me 9 points a week or something like that. It's going to be the guy that's getting you 14, 15, 16 points per week that, you're like, hey, this is actually like my wide receiver one, wide receiver two on my team, like that kind of thing. If he hits, I'm not guaranteeing a hit. I'm just saying, like, he has that upside if he does.
Yeah, I mean, he has that upside, like you said, to be the number one wide receiver there. I don't know if that's ever going to be anything that's too amazing. But at this point in the draft, I guess I can't fault that, right? It's the late second. Not that these picks are throwaway picks by any means. You're taking shots on guys who have solid enough profiles, opportunity, draft capital, etc. Just for me, I've just never been enamored by Polk. There was one point where I'm like, "Ooh, this guy could actually, go early-ish in the NFL draft." Kind of midway through the season, and then just diving into him, I'm not I'm not blown away by his separation skills. I don't even think he's the best rookie that's drafted by the Patriots this year. I'm a Javon Baker fan over him, but Jalen Polk, he certainly could win a starting job there as a rookie, and certainly that's valuable too. So could be a guy who grows in value there, but not somebody I've selected any in rookie drafts thus far. But here, I'm very much still torn. I'm not enamored by any of these guys. That's why I kind of went rogue with that last pick, went against my rankings here. I guess I'll do something very similar, in a guy that I'm not really necessarily even loving at this point, but A.D. Mitchell, a guy going to the Colts, definitely a guy who tests amazing, but doesn't necessarily always play to that athletic testing, but a guy who does have very good movement skills when he wants to be a route runner. He is actually a very good route runner. He flashes big time scoring abilities, so red zone threat. I think the biggest issues is that he's never really been able to dominate targets. Even at Texas this last year, where he took a fairly big step forward as far as his target share and whatnot with good players and Xavier Worthy and JT Sanders. He still wasn't great, though he is clutch as far as some of the plays that he pulls off. So I'm really interested to see, what kind of role he can be there, but he's probably the number 3 wide receiver too. You mentioned some issues with Anthony Richardson's upside, ultimately the accuracy there. Michael Pittman, we still like Josh Downs there. I think that offense could be fun in some ways. So if that offense and Anthony Richardson ends up being better than maybe we've given him credit for, there's certainly upside there for that offense to be very fun, with a guy such as A.D. Mitchell coming in the fold there. So I'll take him towards the very end of the second at the 211.
Yeah, and that's right around where I have him. I think that's a good pick, because obviously, like, injuries happen, things happen. We can be wrong about players. We can be wrong about Anthony Richardson. I don't think we are, but we could be. And so, like, I'm willing to take that shot here around this range. And I mean, there's obviously upside, even if we don't love the player, A.D. Mitchell, there's obviously upside. I mean, he has like a size speed combo that you really don't see all that often. And so, like, you have to say there's upside with the player, even if I don't expect him to hit.
Absolutely. And there was reasons for his profile being the way it was, like being injured basically all of his second year and then transferring into a new team and then right away stepping up in a big way for Texas. But again, it wasn't a picture perfect profile by any means. And there's also concerns that he just doesn't play as fast as what he tested. So then that takes away a little bit from the size speed combo appeal. But at the end of the day, guys like Matt Harmon, and I can't remember, it was a couple other like prominent guys, like they had him in a tier ahead of Xavier Worthy amongst wide receivers in this class. And I'm just like, that to me, that was crazy. But they're like, yeah, A.D. Mitchell is that much better than Xavier Worthy. And I did not agree with it. But there are guys out there who do this for basically a living and I'm not even saying just like scouts, but analysts who put a lot of work charting into these guys, how they will perform for fantasy football and real football. And they really like A.D. Mitchell. So there is potential there that he lives up to being a better player than he was in college for sure.
Yeah, I like the pick there, and I'm going to take a guy that you definitely do not have to take here at 212, but I have put my stamp on this player throughout our podcast history, and I'm going to stick to my guns here, and I'm going to take Audric Estime. But, it's not just me saying, I've always liked Estime, so I'm taking him here. Like, I truly believe this is where I'm willing, once again, in a perfect world where everyone's going off of my rankings, this is where I'm willing to take this guy. You might say, but what about Javonte Williams? Like, Javonte Williams is not a good receiver. He's not a good receiving back. And Audric Estime actually is. Even though people probably want to think of him as like a first and second down plotter, he's really so much more than that. And he actually has a top 5 burst score in this class. And so even though he didn't have that 40 time that we would have loved to have seen, even though he did kind of, speed up a little bit at his pro day, whether you want to believe it or not, he has the burst, and I think it shows up, in film or in college. Like, if you look at what he's doing, that burst shows up, and that's why he was able to do what he's did, even if he doesn't have that high end, top end speed, whatever. And like obviously we can say that Sean Payton didn't draft Javonte Williams. He has no, he has no loyalty to him whatsoever. And so he did draft Audric Estime, and not like super early or anything like that, but early enough to where I feel comfortable taking him here. I think that he's going to be on the field in year one. He's going to touch the ball. He very well could be the third down back, which, like I said, it sounds kind of crazy, but I really think he could be, because I cannot remember who it was, and I can't even remember the stats, so I probably shouldn't even be saying this, but I was listening to a podcast either earlier today or yesterday, and they were talking about Javonte Williams, and it was basically saying how, like, I want to say it was like yards per route run or whatever it was, but he was basically one of the least efficient running backs when we're catching the ball last season, and probably throughout his college career and everything. And so, like, there's opportunity to be had there in Denver. And then we talk about the fact that Audric Estime is this rocked up 228-pound stud. He could easily be the goal line back. He could easily be the third down, short yardage back as well. The more I'm talking about it, it's like, is Javonte Williams even going to touch the field? It could be the Audric Estime show. So I love taking him here. Obviously, I love the fact that you can get him even later. I've taken him in fourth rounds of my rookie drafts. And that's probably more realistic of where you have to take him, like late third if you want to guarantee it or whatever. But I believe the talent is there. He's the most productive running back in this draft class, and people just kind of want to dismiss it because he ran a 4.7 at the combine.
Yeah, it's a sneaky good situation. I will say that a couple things with Javonte Williams too, because he was inefficient as a receiver before he was injured. So his first year, his rookie year in the NFL, he was twice as efficient as a receiver. And in college, he was actually a better receiving back, more explosive and more involved than Michael Carter. So even on his own team at UNC, in fact, he was one of the most efficient receiving backs in his entire class. Javonte Williams, 12.2 yards per reception in his third year in college. I guess I don't know what his, I think he was, yeah, it was pretty good there, his sophomore year in college as well. So definitely there is some potential for Javonte Williams to bounce back now that he's another year post that knee injury, but we just don't know if he's going to get back to that same level he was at before, because his knee injury was kind of gnarly. I mean, it wasn't just an ACL, but I think there was some meniscus and MCL involvement with Javonte Williams' repair and injury. So we might just not ever see him at 100% health again. To be determined there. In that case, Estime would certainly be that next guy up to take on a large workload, or if anything else comes up this year, at the very least could be a very good handcuff in that situation. So don't mind that at all there. Do you want to throw out a couple of honorable mentions here, guys you're maybe eyeing up or considering?
Yeah, I didn't mean to act like I hate Javonte Williams or anything like that, because I definitely don't. I think he was a talented player as a prospect. Obviously, he's had some injuries and things like that that weren't great. But I don't hate the player by any means. I do love Audric Estime though, and I think that he can at least have a role at the very least. But I think that we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Michael Penix Jr. at all. Even though he's basically buried, he is a high, in my opinion, this entire time, he has been a high-end backup quarterback. And we've seen, especially over the past couple of years, that backup quarterbacks touch the field and can actually win you games in fantasy. And so right around this range, 212, 301, whatever, I'm willing to take those guys, because I'm like, hey, Kirk Cousins might get hurt. He's probably not even 100% right now. So we can't even say, like, is he going to be 100% by the end of this or by the beginning of the season? Who knows? Michael Penix Jr. could touch the field as early as this year, even though people want to say, hey, the contract, this and that. None of that truly matters if Kirk Cousins is hurt, and so I'm willing to take him here. I believe he's a high-end backup. I don't believe he's much more than that. I believe that Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. are both kind of that. Like, that's their ceiling as far as I'm concerned, but I'm willing to take him here. And then Javon Baker, that player that you said that you would have had over Polk. I don't have them that far apart from each other, but I do have Polk ahead. But I like both players, and I've taken both in my rookie draft so far. I've been pretty happy with the mix because I've gotten a little bit of both, and so it's been nice where like I don't have to be right or wrong or whatever. I can just hopefully they'll both hit is kind of the goal, and I believe we both like Drake May, obviously, so it's not like we're saying, oh, it can only be one of them. Hopefully it's both of them, and we just say, hey, like they're both talented players. But I put out two. You have a couple for us?
Yeah, I have a couple, and I like the Javon Baker shout out. I've already brought him up a few times, and the way I treat sometimes those wide receivers who get drafted by the same team in the same draft, one guy goes a couple rounds later, is that well, typically the fact that the team drafted them means that they like them, A, but B, I think that they were probably very similar on the Patriots board. I don't know that for a fact. I'm not in their draft group, but the fact that they selected another wide receiver after going with one earlier in the draft means that they were very surprised that Javon Baker was still available, despite the already big investment in drafting a day 2 wide receiver in Jalen Polk. They still went and they said we have to get Javon Baker here. Though most GMs are not bold enough to do that, to double down at the same position. So I think that they saw something there. We'll see if it actually pans out. But as far as some other guys, I have a few that I was considering here. I'll throw out a few wide receivers. Jalen McMillan. Out of Washington, going to Tampa Bay, going to the Buccaneers, could be the wide receiver 3 there. Jermaine Burton could be the wide receiver 3 at Cincinnati after coming from Georgia, then Alabama. For his collegiate career, and
Those
then
are my next two players after Penix and Baker, so we're on board there.
nice, and Roman Wilson could be the wide receiver 2 for Pittsburgh after having kind of a nice breakout season. It's just neither one of us are really necessarily sold on him being a great talent, but you know what? He has some of the athletic tools. He has some of the movement abilities that make it intriguing. I mean, we know how Pittsburgh develops these guys, so it doesn't have to be the perfect guy coming out. I mean, a lot of the Pittsburgh wide receivers were not. I mean, they were like later day 2, early day 3 guys, and they developed into studs. So, not saying it will happen, but maybe with a little bit better quarterback play there this year in Pittsburgh, something can happen. So those are some wide receivers, and I'd be sad if we didn't get a little bit of tight end talk in with JT Sanders going. I think he was a 4th round pick for Carolina, so he'll be going to Bryce Young to work with Bryce Young, and we know that the wide receiver options there are kind of weak, so that makes it very interesting to see if Sanders could soak up some targets there. Don't let the past, Panthers tight end situation, was it Ian Thomas? I guess. So your opinion on him, like they're very different players, very different situations, even though I think the draft capital is similar to what it was years ago for Ian Thomas. I think that JT Sanders, much better player. And then Ben Sinnott as well, athletic player going to Washington. I mean, that landing spot is intriguing as far as if he can establish some rapport with Jaden Daniels. It's intriguing because he's a very good athlete and he's not a bad producer by any means either. So Sinnott is a guy that I have selected in at least one draft, I think in the 3rd round. I think that at the end of the day, I wouldn't be surprised if he was the tight end 2 in this class when it's all said and done after their rookie seasons.
Yeah, you basically had my next 4 players with Burton, McMillan, JT Sanders, and Roman Wilson. So I'm on board. I would have been sniped for sure. I'm not as high on Sinnott as a lot of people. I have them in the same tier, so I mean, I can't say I hate it or anything like that. I just haven't really been the biggest fan of the player, and I still have JT Sanders as my tight end 2, which is probably not consensus, but like you said, I mean, it's not that crazy to think that he could be like the best receiving option on that team. That's not that wild. And he did get picked in the first pick of the 4th round, which people have made a big deal. The first pick of day 3 is always that it's like the guy that should have gone on day 2, but like people kind of just, got lost in the mix or whatever. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, like people are, oh yeah, we got to take him. And so the first overall pick of day 3 ends up kind of being a big deal, and that's JT Sanders. So I like that. I love that when you created the show sheet, you put a 2024 rookie draft speed mock, and then we proceeded to talk for at least an hour on it. Yeah, not a speed mock at all. That is not what we do. We offered or we promised you a 2025 class preview, but we're already at an hour and a half. Do we want to save that for another pod, or do we want to quickly go over some of these players?
Um, I don't know that we're gonna get a speed 2025 preview, knowing us, knowing the role that we're on here. But I mean, at least to give folks an idea and a little teaser for what we're gonna put out next episode. At least want to talk about that, because when you're doing a dynasty rookie draft, you want to know, okay, should I trade out of this draft and target some of these 2025 players? What does that class look like? And if you're not doing any sort of Devy campus to Canton leagues, you don't really have a great grasp typically on what that class looks like. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a few, quarterbacks there. They're not in the Caleb Williams or Drake May type of tier, but they're solid enough. And like Carson Beck, Connor Wigman, Jackson Dart, you could list a couple other guys who could potentially break into that tier, but I don't have anybody else there yet at this time. You're going to hear Shadur Sanders, you're going to hear Quinn Ewers or Cam Ward or Drew Alar, some other guys in there, but I'm not ready to have them that high. So that's a quick quarterback preview. You could be looking at Beck, Wigman, and or Dart as guys like JJ McCarthy or Jaden Daniels, who kind of rise up that same year and are valued kind of around that range. Any thoughts or differing opinions there, John?
No, not necessarily. Like you said, there's no one that's there. There's no one in Debbie Beth that is in the same tier as Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, JJ McCarthy, that they were last year. There are two players that are very close to being in that tier, but they're not. But we can discuss that another time. But there, so like it's not the greatest class yet, but they do have, all these players have the ability to take a step forward, just like those other players did. It's not always going to be the Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence, or whatever, where you from day one that, hey, like they're the guy. It's not always going to be that. So we'll have to see what happens. There's a lot of running backs we could talk about. We will talk about on the next podcast. There's a lot of running backs. The only thing I will say is I'm hearing a lot of people saying, hey, there's so many running backs. This is going to be so exciting. It's going to be such a good draft, blah, blah, blah. But if the running backs are the great part of the draft, I would just warn people, like, think about what just happened in this NFL draft. Like Blake Corum didn't quite go to the best landing spot. Not a terrible one or whatever, but like he could have gone, like, obviously if he goes to the Chargers, like how much more excited are we? Like, if he goes to the Raiders, we're probably even more excited because it's so much more open and ambiguous and that kind of thing. Like there's obviously other players like Estime, whoever, that fell out of love. People fell out of love throughout the process. The same exact thing is going to happen, and maybe even more so, because if there's so many good running backs, then they're going to probably eat into each other, and there might be two running backs that go to the same team, a la and Isaiah Thomas and Braylon Allen going and being buried behind Breece Hall this year. The same exact thing is going to happen, and so we'll get into all the players. I'm not saying I'm not excited about them, but I think it's just we have to remember how tricky running back is, because if that's the greatest part of that draft class, it's probably not going to be a great draft class.
Yeah, but I could counter it too with the idea of the running back landscape currently being what it is. And I have a list up here. So I'm not going to talk about the 2025 guys. That'll be for our next podcast. You got to tune in, of course, for that. But as far as some landing spots next year, Washington, they have Eckler there. I mean, he's soon to be gone. Tennessee, you have Pollard and Spears. Tampa Bay, I mean, I like Rachaad White fine, but really, I mean, he's going to be at least 26 by then. McCaffrey still great, but I mean, another aging guy. We don't really know what Pittsburgh is going to look like. Najee Warren. The New York Giants really don't have anybody. They have Devin Singletary. That's just a short-term option. We know that the Saints, maybe we'll see Kendre Miller step up there, but Kamara is going to be starting to fall off. Same thing with like Ramondre Stevenson. We know that Minnesota's not locked in. Like, I mean, we got Jones and Chandler. I mean, that's not a great combo. Miami could even add another guy. I know they've already got a nice stable there, but they just love getting these guys that fall in the draft that are super athletic. Could you imagine like a Nick Singleton going to Miami or something like that?
Oh wow, yeah.
Like Las Vegas does not have a settled backfield. We know that the Rams can always throw in a guy. We know that the Chargers don't. Gus Edwards, right, and Dobbins, and I guess our boy here, Kamani Vidal, but Kansas City, Pacheco, CEH, not at all established, and I keep going down the list. Joe Mixon for the Houston Texans, he's going over the hill. We know that in Denver, Javonte Williams and company there, probably not the most elite. I mean, they could be fine. Dallas is a prime landing spot that didn't happen this year, but next year it could. Cleveland, Jerome Ford and Nick Chubb. It's like, long term, I don't know. Cincinnati, we got Moss and we got Brown, not the best. Buffalo, we got Cook, and that's about it. And then unfortunately, Derrick Henry cannot be a stud forever. I would love him to be,
Whoa, whoa,
but
whoa.
I know, right? I know I crossed the line there with Derrick Henry, but maybe when he's like 38, he'll fall off. But or maybe when he's like 30 or 31, whatever that is next year. So I think that there's potential there. I don't know how many teams I just listed off, maybe a dozen teams
That's
that
a
could
lot,
really
yeah.
could really use a guy. Like you said, our hearts are going to be broken next year. There's no doubt about it, because there's going to be some landing spots that just don't get filled. Like the team just says, screw it. I hate drafting running backs. Like, we're just going to go with other positions. And, maybe we don't get that perfect landing spot for everybody, but I think that there's enough need that the position is going to be restocked by the 2025 class. And there's a lot to be excited about there at the end of the day, even if not everybody lands in that perfect spot.
Yeah, I mean that's very fair. And I mean, as you're listing them off, I'm like, damn, that is a lot of teams. I would argue that a lot of those teams needed a running back this year and they didn't draft one. So I mean, I'm not saying they wouldn't do it next year, but we would have assumed that the Cowboys would have taken a running back this year, and they didn't. And they
Just a down class in general, I guess. This year's
yeah.
probably the reason more than anything else,
Yeah.
even.
The other thing is, I know there's a lot of excitement for all these players, and we'll get into all these players on the next pod. But as of right now, I only have one running back in the 2025 class that is tier 1. So there's a buttload of tier 2 running backs, and even some that could easily jump into tier 1. I'm not saying it's impossible or anything like that. But as of right now, you have so many tier 2 running backs. Some of them are probably going to fall out. A couple of them are probably going to get hurt. But like, I don't want to overemphasize. Like, I don't want to act like, oh my God, it's the most amazing running back class that we've ever seen or anything. Because as of right now, I would definitely say it's nowhere close to like the 2017 class that people are going to probably try to like compare it to or something like that. Yes, there's a lot of good players, but like not that high end that we saw with that class, at least not as of right now, unless a couple players take a step forward. But I feel like when it's all said and done, it's going to end up being a better running back class than this one. But I don't know if it's going to be like, oh my God, we have 15 running backs that can't miss prospects or anything like that. So I don't want people to just assume that that's what it's going to be. We'll get into it. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more. There's plenty of time for these players to grow and develop and whatever, especially the wide receivers. There's going to be wide receivers that are going to stand out and become, like the coveted players here. But I really feel like it's going to be a down class. Like, it's not a class that I'm overly excited about as of right now. But we will dive into all of those players in the next pod, and we'll probably make it a long one, because that is what we do. We like to talk. We don't get to talk every week or anything like that. So when we do, we like to talk a lot. So, Aaron, do you have any words of wisdom for us before we get out of here?
Yeah. And I will say, for words of wisdom, it might seem like a lot of talking, but hopefully it's a lot of context that is helpful for describing the situations, players, upside, all of those things. So at the end of the day, hopefully all good things that folks appreciate and can benefit from, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you guys sticking with us through an hour and 40 minutes. It was a lot of fun talking to these players. We will dive into the 2025 class on the next pod. But for now, we're going to go ahead and cash out. See you guys.